Pacific.
And this is Origin.
What's up? This is Johnny Tacos here with another exciting episode of Origin Stories. Today, we have a melodic death metal band from Indiana, Symphony of Heaven. And you know what? We're going to get it started with their song, So Rich. It's going to be an awesome show today. It's going to be really just a killer experience to meet the guys and learn about their music and learn more about their ministries. All right, you know what? I said enough. Let's rock and roll. So Rich on the Johnny Taco Show.
Blood
All right, guys, we are back with Symphony of Heaven, the front man, the brainchild, the Indiana pacer himself, Pathos. Hey, guy, what is up today? How's it over there? Is it hot? Because it is, I think, I found the location of hell, and it's the state of Texas.
It's been about 100 degrees here for the last 3 days, and I work in a power plant, and I've been working on the outside or in the building, not in the control room. So it's been about 150 in there for 3 days. I've lost a lot of weight in the last 3 days.
But it's water weight. You'll gain it back.
Oh, I know. That is true.
After it cools off. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing.
Oh, yeah. My upbringing, I've lived and was born and raised here in Southern Indiana, in Owensville, other towns around here. Throughout my upbringing, we lived a couple towns over when I was coming up. My mom was a music teacher. My dad was a power plant worker as well. I have a sister, always had dogs. We had the house out in the subdivisions, out in the country. Really great upbringing that I have been. The older I get, the more I realize how blessed I really was. There was nothing wrong with the world when I was growing up. Everything was great. It was really that white picket fence, even though we didn't have a fence. That type of, American dream type of upbringing. And like I said, my mom was a music teacher. She would also help out with playing piano at church. She taught music at a Christian school. That's where I went for a couple of years growing up before we moved. So everything was very church centered, faith centered. My whole family was of the faith, or at the very least, the patriarchs of the family were, and it was a very very good, wholesome upbringing that, for all intents and purposes. So
you had a pretty good life. You weren't hit with too much of a turbulence, so to speak, during child.
No, not at all. That, as I said, the more it's almost sad, and when you think back, because you remember how good life was and how simple things were, and as you get older, you go through more times and trials and things like that. But everything was great. I have no complaints. It was the best upbringing a kid could ask for, really. It's an upbringing every kid should have or should want. Your parents loved you. You had a nice place to live. Got to play baseball and play in the yard, and it was good. It was, all I can say, it was just really, really good.
So you could say, like, living back then, it's a little bit of a different creature than living nowadays. It's
a completely different universe. It's like a parallel universe, really, honestly.
You used to have to fight kids to come back in. Now you have to fight kids to go back out.
Yes. You know what? I did both. I played outside plenty with the neighbor kids. I had the video game systems. I'd play those too. It was a good, well-rounded. I knew how to play outside. I knew how to play video games and start to learn computers. It was that 90s kid, kind of the best of both worlds. We grew up knowing how to play in the dirt, and we also grew up figuring out how to use technology. So it was good.
Yeah, and during that time, I know that, songs like I just played earlier to get this party started, So Rich, you're like, okay, well, this is heavy and in your face, and you're like, well, my mom was at school. I had this great time and all that. And like, usually when you hear artists that play like the melodic death metal, they were more like, I was in a room all by myself, talking to myself, and I started writing words, and I changed my appearance to look like the corpse because I was afraid of the sun. Stuff like that. Yeah. But, and that's what people's persona, that's what people think that death metal people do. That they live on it. They're death metal 24/7, and there's only like maybe a handful of guys that did it. And with the black metal, that story with what happened to them. But even when I talked to the guys from Black Dahlia, they're a bunch of nerds.
Oh yeah.
They're a bunch of gamers, and you don't really see that hand to hand. Yep, he's got the Fallout 4 just for people that are listening through the ear orifices.
Following total nuclear annihilation.
Yes, as he's giving an interview, there's somebody doing laundry that walked right by him.
That's my wife.
See, death metal artists are people too.
That's right. We're pretty normal dudes for the most part.
And this was a sponsorship brought to you by deathmetalrpeople2.com. The more you know. So going into your music lifestyle, when you were a kid, were you in tune with metal, or did you go into the rock? Because I went with during the 90s, I went with like MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice, Paul Abdul, you know, Warrant, you know, all the pop stuff.
So to give you some background on that, I'm 37. So I was born in 1986. So
you're a little kid.
Oh yeah. So my upbringing, by the time, you know, I didn't get into metal until about 7th or 8th grade when I started getting interested in guitar. I had started on drums. You always had rhythm. That, you know, from the time I can remember, I was always involved with music of some type, and I knew how to keep the beat. And mom and dad got me a drum set in like 4th grade. Never once told me to quiet down. I'd practice and play on that thing upstairs for hours, just whenever I wanted. So God bless them for that. You know, with mom being a music teacher, she understood. And so I grew up a lot with early Christian music. Well, early Christian for me, but then also like 90s country, Alan Jackson, you know, that type of stuff. And I still love to this day. That's my jam right there, the Chattahoochee. And but my first album,
you should do it. You should do it metal version. You should do it. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Call it country death or death country.
Death country. But I remember the first album that I kind of figured out as I got older. I was like, you know, I had been into rock music my entire life. I just didn't realize it. The first album that I remember really being into, I was in 1st or 2nd grade, and it was a Michael W. Smith album, Go West Young Man, which is still a really good album. It's produced well. The songwriting's really well. It's just, I still listen to it to this day, and it brings back a lot of memories. That was something of my mom's that I can hold on to. Sorry. But I realized, like, you know, it had electric guitars. It had some groovy beats to it. I'm like, so I was into rock music before I even realized it, you know, or the old 80s, late 80s adult contemporary alternative rock, like, I can't even think of some of
Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
All in Oak.
Yeah. Stuff like that you'd hear on the radio when you were a kid that was popular on the top 40 radio back then, but you didn't realize that was rock music, you know, and it technically is compared to like pop music standards for the rest of the time. Around 7th grade, I said I got into guitar. Buddy of mine also, and he started getting into some heavier stuff. It started out with like punk, you know, or stuff like on the Biodome. If you remember that movie with Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin, we had that soundtrack, and it had a lot of cool stuff on it. So it was a gradual thing. And then my sister got into high school, and I heard about this band called Korn. And, you know, they seemed dark and edgy, and I didn't know what to think of it, but I just thought that's really cool. So I was drawn to it, and I didn't know why. So I got a poster on my wall of the band. Had never listened to their song before. I just thought it was cool. And I finally heard Freak on a Leash on a radio that was so staticky, I had to like put my ear right to the speaker, and I recorded it on a cassette tape, and it all just took off from there.
You know, that reminds me too, because I had a friend that was actually moving to another state. So what we did is we recorded like an hour show of a DJ that was local.
Yeah.
And we would just do it the hour show and whatever music was playing. And we would do that just like you know, oh, I like this song, hit record, and don't matter if it's staticky or anything. Yep. It was still cool. It's like, wow, I can't believe. But yeah, Korn was one of the bands that opened my eye to more of that. What is that? Nu metal. Yep. That's what they called it. To the nu metal kind of groove to it. But listening to them, you know, it was Scatman Crothers. You know, Scatman.
I mean, maybe I know if you're talking like a genre, you're talking a band.
The band, you know, Scatman, when he was just, what he does is he just muddles his words to a beat.
Yes.
To like jazz, how jazz muddle, they just start making words like sounds and all that. It's sort of like that, but in a metal sense. That's how Jonathan Davis did.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Just
that.
whatever comes out.
And then David Draymond took over with his part in Disturbed. So, they came out, I guess Disturbed came out like, 5 years after Korn?
It was around that time. I remember seeing the video for, it wasn't Down with Sickness. It was the very first video that they put out. And I was, and it was very a disturbed looking video, and I was well into metal and rock by that point. And System Down, Static X, Power Man 5000, all those bands that were popular at that time, got to see them on like Summer Sanitarium 2000 tour. That was great, So yeah, I mean, that's where I started with. And then it was after that 2000 Summer Sanitarium show, then we saw Metallica. And I had somewhat heard some Metallica, but that's when I started really studying them, and I got super big into Metallica all throughout my high school years. Had all the videotapes, all the documentaries, all the albums that I could get my hand on, and just listened and learned a lot of guitar from Metallica. So I'm indebted to them for sure.
So where did death metal come play into it? Because those are awesome metal bands, but they're not that melodic death kind of feel to it. They have rough edges, and they're really edgy and all that. But death metal kind of takes it on a different trip down the whole genre.
I think it had a lot to do. I had Guitar Magazine subscriptions. I had Guitar World and Guitar One, and they'd come in every month. And I would read them cover to cover multiple times. Instead of paying attention in class, I'd be, reading my guitar magazine. So, but I remember I don't know exactly that. And you had Napster, LimeWire, and then just friends in general kind of getting into the same thing. You had Slipknot, which became a little more edgy. That first album's still really good. I enjoy it. I drum to it a lot. It's a lot of fun. Being in drumline, in marching band and stuff, we were the edgy kids, the drummers, so, and we were all into rock and metal. So eventually I would hear more suggestions from my friends, like Obituary. And I remember seeing a Guitar Magazine interview or a review for Cannibal Corpse, Gore Obsessed. And I thought, you know what? This looks really cool. And look at these guitars and their long hair. And these dudes look tough as you know what. So I think I'm going to go to the CD store next time we go, and I'm going to look for this album. And I did. And that's the first full death metal album that I remember buying was, and there might have been others, was Cannibal Corpse, Gore Obsessed. Around the same time, because I would go to the CD store and they had a metal section, and you could also get imports, used CDs. They were cheap. So all my money I made in high school went to that. And I would just go through, and if the cover looked cool, I would buy it. I'd walk out with a stack of CDs. I remember Morbid Angel, The Gateways to Annihilation was one that was a big influence on me sound-wise. Fear Factory, Obsolete album. It's funny, we just watched the Terminator last night, and how it's stuff like that. It was just kind of a movie soundtracks, like The Matrix. You had Rage Against the Machine on there. It was osmosis over time, finding and hearing more bands, little whispers from the corners, like, oh, what's this? I'm going to go check this out. And then just all of a sudden you realize that, and I hadn't gotten into black metal. I didn't get into black metal for a very long time. I was scared to, honestly, for good reason. But death metal, old school Florida sound was, Cannibal Corpse is another one. Obviously, everybody loves Cannibal Corpse. So, or you should love Cannibal Corpse. And so try to learn a lot of their songs. And really a lot of it had to do with wanting to learn to play guitar better and seeing how fast these guys could play. And I want to do that, so I need to learn it. And just over time, just becoming something that's a part of you.
Yeah, which is amazing how they blended such a quick technique on their guitar and their drums, and they kind of went parallel with the beat of the double bass of the drums and the way the guitar screams.
And I have another thing that I would be amiss if I didn't mention. We had gotten satellite television at the house as I'd gotten older, which we didn't usually have. It had a TV channel called Much Music, which was a Canadian. We didn't have MTV. We had VH1. So that was another one, all the behind the musics. Oh, watch them. And then Much Music it had a Canadian channel, and it had a lot of metal on there. That's where I first heard Killswitch Engage. I think that's the first place I ever heard In Flames, or somewhere on the satellite television. Maybe it was the music channels. So it was just being a lover of discovering music. And then seeing the videos for that stuff was a big thing as well. So I didn't have Headbangers Ball till Headbangers Ball 2 came around, but I had already gotten into a lot of stuff by then. So.
And so what made you decide to be in a death metal band instead of just following the roots of Metallica as a doom metal or, thrash?
Yeah. I think it's just because ultimately that was the music. I mean, I still love early Metallica stuff, Justice and before. Black Album is fine. But, anything that was more extreme, anything that made you just got your blood pumping and felt epic and like it sounded as big as the sky was something that really just took my imagination. When I first heard Dimmu Borgir, I was blown away. Just like I didn't think it was humanly possible to play as fast as what the drums were doing. Enthroned Darkness Triumphant, that album, I still love. One of my favorite albums to this day. Just the production on it just sounds so dreamy, I guess is the only way I can describe it. Just like it sounds like a dream. It's just this big, expansive, atmospheric. The guitars sound like they are seething, like they just like that, So, I mean, I think it's the overall atmosphere is what drew me more to that style. And then just more in your face, like a fist knocking your teeth out type of thing.
Sort of like that Pantera Vulgar Display picture.
Yes. Oh man. Yes. That's another one that was, I can't believe I hadn't even mentioned them yet. I remember riding around in the truck, having bought their album at the CD store and listening to that, and then being a young guitar player, obviously with Dimebag, and seeing him in the guitar magazines and hearing what he was doing, buying the home videos. Maybe I was a little too young to see some of the home videos, but it was cool. I mean, that's what you wanted to do. It's what you wanted to do what they were doing as far as the music and all that stuff. So yeah, it was just it was just different things from everywhere, and just wanting to do something that sounds bigger,
Yeah, which is understandable,
Oh yeah.
You go big or go home.
Exactly.
That's a lot of the metal motto there.
Yes.
But how did you go from death metal to secular and actually building it towards like a Christian feel? Did you listen to a lot of heavy Christian death metal bands? I know Hard Look is Chris is a good friend of mine. He's a producer of the show, and that was actually one of the first bands that I actually heard death metal, but it was a Christian
absolutely
aspect. So how did how did you metamorphosize that to a Christian lifestyle? Because and I'm only saying it because I see it, but some of the listeners that I have, they're still on the fence about Christian metal and they still want to learn more about it, because you have this stereotype of what a metal musician is, and then you have this stereotype of what a Christian is.
Yep.
And then when you see it together, you're like, well, those are puzzle pieces that don't fit. Yeah. But for yourself, for Chris, for Let the Day Perish, let 13 Minutes, all these bands had made it a ministry to do it. So what? How did that come around?
Well, first of all, Chris from Hard Look, I hope you're doing well, buddy. And if he sees this and produces it, hope you're doing well, man. Okay, I was a Christian before I was a metalhead. I was, I took my step of faith, and I was baptized at 11. I think it was 11. Yeah, it was 11. And for me, it was like I'm all in, and it always made sense to me, and it always. So it's like, my worldview has always been one since the time I can remember, growing up with a Christian worldview, being taught it from my parents and my grandparents, and then accepting that at a young age, and then also going through life, studying it for myself, and yeah, exactly. This makes perfect sense to me. So being a Christian first, and then the music was there just as much from the time I can remember. So music to me is, there's all kinds of music, and it's all special. Most of it. Some of it's not. But, so as far as when it got into metal, I just knew something about it drew me to it. And I think, like I said, it had to do with wanting to learn to play my instrument well. It was something that was darker, deeper than I had heard. I mean, it don't sound like Alan Jackson or George Strait, which I love those, but there was something as a young teenager that draws you to it. What it was, I don't know. I mean, was it part of this seems a little rebellious, this seems almost like something I shouldn't do? I don't know. It's always, you never can't remember every feeling and thoughts you had when you were 13 years old. But overall, in general, it was just like, it just makes sense to my ears. So my music and playing in metal, I've always, everything comes second to Christ. Everything does. We wouldn't have music at all unless it was for God. So in my worldview, every style and type of music, the only reason we have it is because God has enabled us to do it and to hear it and to understand it. And to me, metal music makes the most sense. It is, if we believe that there's a God who uses his power to make absolutely every single thing in the entire universe and things we can't see, if we believe that, and the power that he has, boy, metal music seems to kind of mimic that in my view and to my ears. Like, it's big, it's heavy, it makes you think. It just feels right to me. Not just metal music, but you can call old classical music metal in the same sense of the word, because it was good, it was deep, it was dark, it was bright, fiery, just all the big bright colors of the world, and metal kind of takes that and it kind of distills it down to almost the perfect place, at least for me. And so, yeah, I mean, but the thing is, listening to Christian metal, I didn't know there was any. You got to remember, this is late 90s, early 2000s. There was not really any Christian metal on the TV or the radio, minus POD. That was really the only one I could think of. I'd heard of Stryper, didn't really know about him or much, but so all I had was the secular music. And so I had to kind of keep my ears attentive, and like some things I could let pass and other things I'm like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And that's different for everybody, but it wasn't until I got older and the internet and more in depth than that I started to discover bands like Pantocrator and Tester, that there was actual Christians making metal, and it was good. Like, it wasn't like, oh, this is cheesy, or, oh man, it's not as cool as the other bands. Why is that? I was like, wow, this is actually like good and or better. and they're Christians like me. And they've been doing this for a long time, and I had no idea, so I still do that to this day, discovering bands from that, in different parts of the world, all the way back in the 90s, that they were there. I just didn't know. I'd never heard of Horde for probably 15 years after I got into metal. So I was a Christian who listened to metal, and I guess maybe just my mindset was one of maybe different than most people look at things. So.
Yeah. I totally agree with you with all that. But we're getting close to the end of the show. I want to talk about your band, Symphony of Heaven. We've been just chatting about other musicians. Yeah. We forget the cream of the crop.
I get going. You gotta stop me, man. I just start talking.
Yeah. So this was supposed to be a solo project, just you, right? Such as my friend Chris.
Yes.
Such as my friend, I have a couple of friends that just do solo projects. They do everything, the drums, the guitar, everything. And it comes out, it sounds like a full band. Yes. So you had in your heart, because you wanted to start this band, but you wanted to do a solo because because there's so many people out in the world that don't really see your vision on how it is, and Indiana doesn't really have a lot of death metal fans out there.
Yeah, it's few and far between. So I wanted to start it, but I also knew I didn't want to leave it there. Who wants to leave it just doing it in their house? It's metal. It needs to be played live. So I ended up meeting a guy on the internet, Asaph, Mason Beard, and we got to know and talk, and I found out he was a drummer. I was like, oh, really? Okay. So I went up to his house, about 2.5 hours north of here, up around Indianapolis. And I had no idea. I'd never heard him drum. And he was like 16 or 17 at the time. This is 6-7 years ago. It was 2018. Yeah. So I went up there not knowing what to think. And I just gave him the CD, or gave him the songs. I said, play this, that I had programmed. And he knocked it out of the park. And it's been me and him, kind of like the James and Lars of the band ever since, So, and then we got David Napier from Timoritus. I had gotten to be friends with him. He jumped on as well. And then we ended up getting Eero Tertsunen from the band Renaissance, which I had heard and had found out through my musings online that he was in Bloomington. And I'm like, I thought he was from Finland. So I messaged him. And what's so funny is I messaged him because they needed a drummer for Renaissance. I'm like, oh, I could drum. And I was like, it was either they didn't have a drummer or they didn't play at Audio Feed. I was like, I can drum if you need me to. He's like, well, if it was that easy, I could do it myself. And it was like, oh, shoot. And he's like, wait, sorry. We laugh about that to this day. So he jumped on. And then we had a full band. We played Audio Feed. The first live show was in 2019, Audio Feed. And it's just been great ever since, just constantly trying to grow as musicians.
So have you been everywhere? Are you an everywhere man?
We have been, the farthest we've played would be like Audio Feed up in Illinois, about 3 or 4 hours away. We have not been blessed with any opportunities yet to play further than like a 3-hour loop. We're constantly looking. But so far, it's been Indy, Louisville, mid to northern Illinois. Those type is about the farthest that we've been able to go.
Yeah, because they have a Christian Mexican, like from Mexico, they have a Christian metal show in Mexico they do once a year.
Yes.
You might want to check that out because of, I know so many bands that were able to participate in there.
Yes. Exodo
and
Fest.
When they took it there.
Exodo Fest, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And when they went over there, they were amazed how awesome the people were and how generous and how nice they were to people that played metal, because metal's a big thing in Mexico.
Oh, yes.
And people don't understand that. They're like, well, all I hear is like Tejano music or pop music. But, you tend to forget the further down you go into Brazil and all that. That's where a lot of the death metal
it's huge down there.
Originated, kind of.
Yes.
Sepultura, know, them. It's just amazing how a culture over there just embraces metal. And when Metallica's there, Mexico City shuts down.
Oh, yeah.
And that's like a couple million people.
Oh, yeah. But, so, yeah, that's at this point in time, we had right now we're down to 3 members. Eero and his family ended up going back to Finland. David chose to pursue his other thing. So we have Onyx. He's a local guy that we got to know who filled in for us. I became good friends with him. He's like a brother to us now. So that's where we stand right now as a 3-piece, looking for in the future to get another 4th member. But we put out the Ascension of Extinction in 2020. That was kind of that in-between period where it was still me doing things, but also checking with them and collaborating on writing and programming. Then we put out Maniacal. That was a full thing. So yeah, we're just keeping moving forward, man.
Awesome. And I want to thank you for being on the show. We're going to listen to The Arc of Time, which I think is one of your best songs I've heard so far.
Thank you.
And I'm still learning more about your library and music coming out. Real quick, any merchandise that people can buy?
You can go to christianbandshirts.com. They always have a supply of our stuff. As far as through our website and stuff, we kind of hit and miss with that, but we're going to get that going. But christianbandshirts.com will take care of you.
Awesome. Here is The Arc of Time.
Such plans as